I spent the past 3 months creating a paradox form for each and every starter. This means that I had to create 94 different Fakemon. Since I didn't want you to have to watch a bunch of different videos, I've combined them into one big compilation. I decided to combine Bulbasaur with Mega Venusaur. I did this because they've done the same thing for Roaring Moon, and I thought it would have been cool to do it for one of my own Fakemon as well. We started out by figuring out that we'd make him a grass rock type, so we'd have a few more guidelines to follow. I did have to be careful I didn't turn him into an Ivysaur looking Pokemon. I achieved this by keeping the same aesthetic a Bulbasaur has. I would just change his patches into rocks, gave him longer teeth, and added a Venusaur plant onto his back. For the colors I would have loved to keep the same colors as regular Bulbasaur, but I just saw this Pokemon run around in the desert and I couldn't let that idea slide. Primordial Bloom. This Pokemon lives around trees in Area 0, where it hides hoping for bird Pokemon to land on its spikes, as it mostly likes to feed on birds. Primordial Bloom is very aggressive against other Pokemon, but they appear to be nice towards humans. This makes them quite easy to train and catch, but when you use this Pokemon in battle, he can lose control out of pure rage. It's known for using very sharp rocks to protect himself and to harm others. It was definitely fun to try something different by combining Mega Venusaur and Bulbasaur, but I'm glad I've only done it once. I thought it would have been difficult to evolve the first stage since we based it off of Mega Venusaur. Luckily this was not the case. Someone in my chat suggested to implement the design of Gigantamax Venusaur, and I thought it would be a cool way to still use one of those forms, but make it different than the Mega. I do have to say that I struggled quite a while to get the plan on his head right. It was a difficult shape since we had to try to give it a 3D effect. Once I was happy with the shapes, I got the idea to make the leaves into rocks. This was a perfect way to make him feel more like the grass rock type he actually is. We did have to find a way to still make him look a bit like his first form. That's why I brought back the spikes, and I decided to decorate his back with a desert-like flower. I did get to a place during the sketch where I wasn't really sure if this piece would come together. This completely changed when I put in the desert colors. I especially love the decision we made for the leaves, and the color palette just finishes it up perfectly. We did experiment with a green eye because the Gigantamax form uses that, but the color didn't fit the design, so we made a red variant. For the shiny I didn't want to use the color shiny Ivysaur uses, because that didn't look good for the first form either. We just gave him the regular colors of Ivysaur, and I think that looks sick. Flowered Crown. This Pokemon uses its vine to grab birds out of the air. Since it evolved, it is even more aggressive to other Pokemon, but it is still very friendly to humans. It does appear to have tamed its anger issues in battles, but can still sometimes lose control. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with this piece, since we already used the Mega and Gigantamax forms on the previous stages. Instead of taking on this drawing based off of those forms, I decided to mainly look at the features I gave my designs. This is why I thought it would be cool to add rocky armor on top of his body, and we of course had to add the other details to fit him into the desert-dwelling Pokemon he's supposed to be. I'm talking about the plant on his back, which has to look more like a cactus than an actual tree. We also continued to use his vines, and we decided to move the spikes away from the rocks and place them on the trunk. We did have to make sure that he could also sound like a poison typing. That's why I made his tongue look a bit stickier, and we made his teeth a lot sharper and bigger. I do have to say that I'm not the biggest fan of how I made this eye, but it is what it is, and I still think it looks pretty cool. Sturdy Titan. This Pokemon likes to live in sandy and deserted areas. They are mostly seen as royalty in these areas. They are very protective over their young, using their sharp and venomous fangs to poison their attackers before using their rocky vines to toss them away. There have been little sightings of bird Pokemon in these deserts, because it appears that the size of the avian doesn't matter, because Sturdy Titan will still try to eat it. Like I just said, the eyes could definitely get an improvement, but the overall design looks pretty sick. I know this Pokemon will probably be the favorite of a lot of you guys. I knew from the start I wanted to add a different accent color to the design. I decided that using spikes would be a great fit for that. I eventually settled on a design which makes him look like a Dilophosaur. I also gave him bigger teeth and claws to add a bit more fighting power. For the colors I used a slightly darker orange and of course the red accent colors, which I used in his eyes as well. For the final rendering I used my skill brush, and I think that finished up the design perfectly. Scorching skills. We don't know much about this Pokemon, since it seems to be very rare. We do have noticed that the ones we were able to research are very active and easily angered. This makes them near impossible to capture. Their flames can reach up to 800 degrees Celsius, but when stressed it becomes even hotter and starts glowing blue. One has been seen roaming around the hotter areas of Area Zero, though it might be due to their own presence. I do think I've done Charmander justice with this piece, so hopefully I won't get hate on it. At first I wasn't really sure if I wanted to bring back the Dilophosaur like neck color, because it isn't the most pretty thing. I did try a bunch of different things, like just a few spikes or only at certain regions, but the piece just didn't come together. I even tried the silhouette method, and we did eventually bring back the neck color. To be fair, it doesn't look too bad, and it does fit the evolution line very well. We also enlarged the back of its head, because this makes the design look a lot less developed, just like a caveman. Other changes were bigger arms and claws, a bigger and spikier tail, and a horn on its nose. The color stayed basically the same as regular Charmeleon, but we added a red accent color just like we did for Charmander. To finish up the piece, we added the scale brush again, and I think it looks awesome. Primal Flame. This Pokemon seems to be a ruthless predator of an ancient world. Rivaled by few and feared by many, Primal Flame is extremely powerful. Its skills and claws can reach up to 1000 degrees Celsius, which it uses to burn down its enemies. I am not really sure about this piece. One side of me absolutely adores it, and the other side thinks it's a bit ugly. I think that Charizard might be the only one who actually gets a real Paradox form, since he wasn't shared on previous gimmicks either. I do actually love most of his other forms, so I thought it would be cool to merge all of them together into a Paradox form. We did still have to make sure we also added the features of our Charmeleon form into the design, since it does still need to fit the evolution line. We started out by using the Mega Charizard Y form as a base. I love this design a lot, because in my opinion it fills up all the old features of the regular Charizard's design. Our first changes were the spikes on the tip of the wings, which I stole from the other Mega form. The next changes we made were to make his head look a bit less streamlined by enlarging the spikes on the back of it. We then just added the red spikes from our previous stages. I know we used a frill on those two, but I wasn't happy with it anyways, so it felt good to get rid of it. The last big changes we made was to add the flaming wings from the Gigantamax form, and we also used the scaly belly pattern to make it look even more prehistoric. For the colors we kept the Mega Y form palette, but we also added in the red accent color. You might be thinking it doesn't look enough like the other Mega form, but I might be able to change that opinion when you see a shiny. Radiant Drake. This Pokemon shares a lot of similarities with the Charizard we know. It does appear to have a lot of features which aren't present in the average Charizard, making us believe that Radiant Drake is related to a more superior form of Charizard. It is well known for his constantly blazing wings and his fear-inducing roar. While it can fly at impressive speeds, it prefers to capture its prey within its wings to go for the finishing attack. Yeah, I know I said I probably wasn't going to top the design of our future form of Swampert, but this piece came really close. I can't put it above my boy Swampert, but I can't put it lower than him either. These guys just both deserve the golden medal. I may have made a small mistake on this one. Instead of turning this Pokemon into a Paradox form, I sort of turned him into a convergent Pokemon. I did still want to show him in this video because I just love him so much, and I really think you'd like him too. I turned Squirtle into an Ankylosaur, something like that. Coming back to the point I said earlier, I know you do actually have to use the same colors as the regular Squirtle, so that's why he's totally different and sort of a convergent Pokemon, because we used the brown colors which looked way better, but we did turn the shiny into a shiny Squirtle, so I tried. Smashing Shell, the not so good Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is supposedly born from boulders when they hit Earth from the highest of mountains. Even though this Pokemon resembles Squirtle quite a lot, this Pokemon is actually way stronger. Like I said before, this isn't the best Paradox Pokemon, but you have to agree that it looks pretty sick. I especially like the way I rendered it with the scales. That really sells him as a dinosaur. This evolution line will probably turn out to be the most unique one out of them all. I know it doesn't necessarily follow the Paradox rules, but in my opinion these colors make them look way better. We of course already had a good concept to follow, but I did still want this design to feel like Wartortle. I tried to accomplish this by making the spikes on its head emulate the wings he usually has. Someone in my chat suggested that we'd also make his shell a bit more spiky, and that made the design so much better. I did struggle a bit on its tail again, because it's just such a weird shape, and I'm still not the best at drawing shapes in a 3D atmosphere. Like I said for the colors, we didn't change much from the first form. Hardened Tootle, the Paradox Pokemon. Its armor became much harder due to its evolution. It lost a battle against other Pokemon of the same species. Sometimes parts of their armor break, but it appears that they can easily fix them with the help of some fresh mud. I think this design looks amazing. It might give off a little bit of flying type energy, but so did Wartortle, and he wasn't one either. I found a pose which would work perfectly for the Ankylosaur look we were going for. The pose made it possible to put a lot of emphasis on the tail instead of its body. It did take me a while to get the tail right again, but luckily we eventually made it work. It was then time to tweak the shield. I had to remove his cannons since he isn't a water type anymore. We did this by making his shield more interesting, by making it spiky and adding shackles to make it look like they hold the shield together. We also gave his head the extrusions and made his eyebrows more prominent. Last but not least, we just added some scales onto the design, and it was then just time to put in the colors. This was definitely my favorite part while working on this line, because it suits the concept so well. But Nick, this isn't how Paradox Pokemon work. I know, but this looks so much better. Battering Beast. This Pokemon never backs down from a fight. It would do anything to protect its previous stages. The tail of this Pokemon has been proven to be strong enough to smash even the hardest materials into a million pieces. I have decided that this line is perfect. It's okay if you don't agree, but I think it's freaking awesome. Paradox designs are very similar to the original pieces, so I used a tracing method in order to keep the main aesthetic the same. I decided to base this form off of a prehistoric plant, which I may have made up myself because I just can't find it online, but I do think we put in some elements that actually makes him look like a Paradox form. Take the teeth, the little petals, and maybe a little bit more of a mean look, for example. I'm especially in love with the way I rendered the eyes. For the colors I didn't change up much. The only big difference are the flowers on its body that went from green to pink. Ravaging Blossom. This mysterious Pokemon is said to be a merge between an ancient form of plant life and a dinosaur. It may look like a Chikorita, but be warned, this Pokemon is way more powerful. I think I've done a pretty good job on this one. It's pretty similar to the original design, but it is still different enough to sell as a Paradox Pokemon. The teeth and the little petals actually make him look way more feral, which is sort of what a past form of Paradox Pokemon is. More teeth, longer hair, or any spikes. This was the first Pokemon we designed last time, which means that it could definitely use an improvement. I've learned a lot since then, so I want to give Bayleaf something extra instead of only turning his leaves pink. I decided to do this by giving a large leaf color, just like Meganium's. I also added leaves to his chin in order to give myself the option to do something with it for the final evolution. My goal for Meganium is to turn it into our first Dragon Fairy type. Mega Altaria not included, of course. For the colors I did still want to use the pink flowers, because that will be the main reason we can use that specific typing. I'm sorry I mostly talked about his evolution, but this design is just waiting to be evolved and turned epic. Fierce Flower. This Pokemon is a perfect example of how outwards appearances can be extremely deceiving. This Pokemon is a true savage and has a brutal nature hidden behind the facade of its plain and simple looks. When angered, this Pokemon will take on anything on its path, using its sharp leaf to slice through its enemies. Like I said, this Pokemon really needs to get an evolution, but I am still happy with this design. It's simple but effective. This was a very interesting design to make, since we had to combine the fierceness of a dragon type and the bubbliness of fairy ones. I tried to achieve the fierceness by making his facial expressions look a bit mean and by giving him quite a few teeth. We also added a few more spikes onto his neck to make him look more intimidating and dangerous. I decided that we could achieve the fairy type feeling by making his flower look a bit more rounded. I did this because round shapes are mostly used to describe friendlier designs, while sharp and pointy edges usually give off more intimidating energy. Even though this won't be a grass type anymore, I still felt like he needed to keep the flower around his neck. I think this isn't too far-fetched, because there are a lot of animals in real life who do the exact same thing. We decided to go off of the colors of Fierce Flower instead of the colors of Meganium. We did this because otherwise it would have still looked too much like a grass type, and now it fits the evolution line better. Craving Giant. In ancient times they were one of the most ferocious predators. They are very good at camouflaging themselves regardless of their big size. Even though this Pokemon is very strong, it can still be defeated by larger groups of Pokemon, since its attacks are mostly focused on one target at a time. I wouldn't really say this is my favorite line, because I do still think they're quite forgettable. I'm not sure if that is because my designs weren't good enough, or if that was the issue of the original Pokemon. This piece suffered the same issues Iron Hub struggled with. The dark colors just didn't fit him. Since Cyndaquil's body is closer to pure white than it is to black, I had to do something different for the flames on its back than usual as well. It looked awful without the yellow part, so I just threw the paradox rules out of the window and added it back into the flames. I am very happy with the way I shaded this piece, because that really saved the design, and I actually think it doesn't look that bad. Iron Quill. This Pokemon appears to be timid. It never attacks on its own and loves to stay curled up into a ball. When provoked, Iron Quill harbors tremendous firepower and can easily take down groups of Pokemon. Even though it might be timid, trainers are able to catch it when they approach it with enough caution and patience. I will say that this isn't my favorite future form I've made so far, but I do think I've shaded the piece in a very good way. This made me realize that the coloring is probably the only thing I don't love about the design. I would still definitely shiny hunt it though. This was one of my least favorite pieces out of the first batch, because I felt like it lost too much of the Cyndaquil energy. This was mainly because we completely removed the light color of its body and made him black. We did still want to change some parts of its body into metallic features, but we had to find a good balance for it. We achieved this by adding gloves onto his arms, giving him a big rubber patch on his belly, and we decided to add a light metal accent to its design. I also made his ears a little bit pointier to sell the robotic theme a bit more. The rest of the design was just basically a regular Quilava, but then with the lighted areas instead of flames. We did add some yellow to the lighted areas in order to emulate the missing flames. When I put in the colors, I instantly saw the difference the light color made in order to still feel like a Quilava. Iron Forge. This Pokemon is a very friendly and protective creature. It is no longer afraid to fight, and it will protect Iron Quill and other small Pokemon. They love to help their trainers cook, and their light shines the brightest when they're doing so. I think this piece is so much better than the Cyndaquil one we made. After the upgrade of the first form, Quilava definitely deserved to get his fitting evolution as well. I wanted to give this design something extra, because otherwise it would have looked too much like the second stage. I tried to do so by making his gloves a bit more blocky, and I thought it would be cool to bring in an entirely new detail. I gave him holes in his chest to make it seem like he would have blazing energy running to the core of his body. I did this because regular Typhlosion already looks like he has this feature, so why not make it clear he has this explosive firepower. We also made some of the rest of his shapes blocky and then just added in the colors. I tried to make the colors a bit more grey, since that fits the robotic theme of course. We also added in yellow into the lighted parts, because it wouldn't really look like flames otherwise. Iron Eruption. This Pokemon was first designed to monitor volcanic areas where it would normally be too hard for humans to go to. Researchers eventually abandoned this Pokemon due to the amount of fuel it required, leaving them out to die close to the volcanoes. However, Iron Eruption found a new source of fuel, lava. If I had to critique myself, I I would probably say that the 3D aspect of the drawing could have been better. I'm talking about the holes in his chest, but I do think the end result still looks sick. For this drawing we didn't change a lot. I did extend his eyebrow a bit, gave him a lot more spikes, made his tail a little bit bigger, and gave him bigger teeth. I really feel like I just described the Paradox Pokemon. I feel like some people aren't gonna agree with me on this one, but changing a lot for Paradox Pokemon isn't the way you should do it. Of course it might be a better and cooler design if you did change a lot, but I am trying to stay close to the rules laid out by Pokemon itself. Even though we did have some very different Paradox Pokemon, mostly walking Wake, I do feel like that's because he's a legendary. The rest of the past forms mostly just have bigger teeth, hair, or any other kind of element on their design. Razor Jaws. This Pokemon was an apex predator from 20 million years ago. There have been findings of their teeth that look surprisingly new. There seem to be quite a lot of sightings from very weird looking and aggressive Totodile. We believe this is a very ancient form of Totodile with a unique typing and a lot more strength. If you happen to encounter one of these, please make sure to run. I think only big Totodile fans will instantly notice all the differences. They might not look like much, but when you compare them side by side, there are actually big differences between the two. I think the shiny for this piece looks incredible as well, and I'm actually very happy with the end result. For this piece I wanted to continue the changes we made for Totodile. I extended his brow to give him a caveman look, which really fits Crocodile, since his body markings already look like the outfit from the Flintstones. I also made his tail longer and his jaw bigger as well. This gives him an unbalanced look, which fits his second stage perfectly. It also gives him a reason to eventually evolve into the more optimized Crocodile we know and love. I also extended the spikes on its back because I might want to move into a Spinosaurus with a huge jaw for the Feraligatr. For the colors I decided to make them just a tiny bit darker than the colors of the first form. Spiked Spine. Unlike its first stage, this Pokemon seems to be less aggressive, but don't get fooled by its act. While it may look like it's lazing around, it always keeps an eye on its surroundings and patiently waits until prey approaches. When their prey is within range, they use their incredibly strong jaws to take them down, which proves that they can be just as fierce, if not fiercer than their first form. I think that this will be a perfect fit as a second stage form, but it does put a lot of pressure on the final design. If that one is good, the entire line will look fire. Well, actually water. I previously said that I wanted to move this line into a Spinosaurus looking dude, but with a big chunky mouth instead of the slender ones the real Spinos had. We started out by extending his eyebrow, like we did for the first two forms. We then made sure to give him a bigger mouth, and we also gave him sharp and longer teeth. It was then time to bring in the seal on its back, since it wouldn't really feel like a Spinosaurus otherwise. After that we extended the spikes on his head, but we made sure to disconnect it from the seal in order to bring a bit more depth into the piece. The last small details we added were the scale-like features onto most parts of his body. The colors we used were a bit different than the colors of Feraligatr. Instead of using the lighter blue for his body, I wanted to keep the shade we used for our drawings. Crunching Chomp. This Pokemon is known to be extremely aggressive. It attacks anyone or anything that wanders into their territory. They have one of the highest bite forces of any Pokemon to this day and can only be trained by the most gifted trainers. I think we did a good job on making this Pokemon feel more like a prehistoric version of himself. The subtle feature changes we used for this line did just enough to make them feel different, even though Crocs haven't changed much in real life either. For this design I tried to make Trico a lot more pointier and sort of hairier as well, and I gave him claws and teeth to make him look more feral. One of my viewers suggested that we stuck his tongue out as well, which was a perfect idea, and it opened up the possibility to make him a poison type. Even though I really love making Paradox starters, I do find it annoying that I can't use other colors than the original art pieces. Some of these Pokemon would look so much better with a different color palette, but sadly to follow the Paradox rules, you actually have to use the same colors. At least for this piece we were able to add a little bit of purple to it, and we made the original colors just a tiny bit darker. Furious Gecko. Despite its small size, this Pokemon terrorized the jungle over 15 million years ago. We have no clue where it came from, but it appears to be a far back relative from Trico. Even though these species may look like each other, this variant is actually way more dangerous. One bite from this creature is powerful enough to take down an entire herd of Tauros. I am really happy with this design. I think it stays very close to a Trico, but adding the tongue added so much to the design. It really looks like an old version of Trico, which I'm very happy with. For this piece I wanted to go into a Velociraptor kind of look. I wanted to do so because I felt like our first drawing showed quite a few dinosaur traits. This is why I decided to give him claws, teeth, and a purple tongue again. We also made his leaves a bit spikier, which fits the past Paradox theme perfectly. Now I did still want to portray his grass typing, but he is going to be a dragon poison type for his final evolution. This is why I shortened the leaves, which gives us room to make them look like leafy spikes on Sceptile. It took me a while to find the perfect shape for his tail, but I do think it's a great detail and it definitely fits the dinosaur look we're going for. For the colors I went with a darker variant of green and made the red way brighter. I did this because poisonous animals usually have very bright colors to warn off predators that they aren't food. Bright colors can also be used for intimidation, which this Pokemon is not afraid to use. I do quickly want to say that this Pokemon is rather venomous than poisonous, but the theory behind it still affected my color choice. Ivy Raptor. This Pokemon can be found deep in jungles. It uses its sharp claws to climb up trees and hides there until it can leap out onto unsuspecting prey. Its tongue is said to be coated in a special toxin, and one swift lick can leave the prey completely immobilized. This Pokemon is so awesome. Furious Gecko was actually one of my favorite designs out of the first batch, and I think Ivy Raptor is a perfect evolution for him. I decided to use all the Mega variants for all the final stage Hoenn starters. I did this because Hoenn is my favorite region, and it still has the best set of starters of all time. The goal for this piece was to implement a few venomous features and to make it look a bit more like a dinosaur in general. We started out by drawing in the tongue, which is a big part of this evolution line. We followed this up by adding serpent-like fangs into his mouth, which suddenly gave me an idea for the entire concept. I could really see this Pokemon act like a rattlesnake, so I decided to make his tail a bit thinner and to look a bit closer to a real rattlesnake tail. The last changes we made were the raptor-like claws on his feet, the claws on his hand, and we changed the spikes on his arms into blades. The color palette for this creature was a bit different than a real Mega Sceptile as well. I added in a white color on his chest and his tail because I wanted to emulate a bone-like structure with the goal of showing off how deadly this Pokemon is. Sizzling Snake. This Pokemon lost the thrill of the hunt. Only one bite is enough to take down most of their prey, but they like to play with their food before they strike. You can hear a rattling sound around you, but Sizzling Snake blends in perfectly with the foliage of the jungle, so you have no clue where it actually is. I went a bit ham on his shiny, because I wanted to play around what this Pokemon would look like if he didn't have to follow the Paradox rules. I thought it would look awesome with a more poison-like color palette, so that's why the shiny looks like this. For this piece I wanted to use the real life information that chickens are far down descendants from dinosaurs. I thought it would be cool to turn Torchic into a dinosaur looking creature with arms instead of those tiny wings. I worked on this piece for quite a long time because I just didn't get the legs to work. I eventually stumbled on a cool design where his legs are a bit more developed and muscular. I also gave him extended head feathers to make him look bigger than he actually is, so he's able to use intimidation as well. I did feel like the design wasn't finished yet. This is why I decided to do the silhouette test, which showed me that he needed a big tail in order to fill up the empty space on the right. The piece really came to life when I put in the colors, and the shading finished up the design perfectly. Just wait until you see the shiny. It looks fire. Feather Flare. This Pokemon seems to be a distant relative of Torchic. There do appear to be relatively new sightings of this Pokemon. Scientists are trying to figure out how that is possible, because it's tearing up the local ecosystems. This Pokemon is extremely aggressive and seems to hunt for fun. It appears that this Pokemon never had such easy prey before. Be warned, trainers, Featherflare is not an easy catch, but if you try, make sure to catch him before he catches you. I am extremely happy with this piece, and boy would I shiny hunt this thing. I do want to mention that someone suggested that we should call this thing Prehistoric. I really love that name, but I had to follow the Paradox rules for naming this creature, and I think Featherflare is a pretty good name as well. I think we started going in a great direction for this line, but I'm not a huge fan of the Super Saiyan chicken look we went for. This is why I did want to bring back some head feathers, but I wanted to make them look a bit more casual. I achieved this by making it look like the feathers were combined into 3 tails. We also brought back his dinosaur looking tail, and we decided to give him actual hands with claws in order to sell the dragon typing we're going for. The beak was actually quite difficult to make since we're looking at it from the front. I definitely still wanted it to look rough, so added small points to the inner parts of the beak and made it sharper in general. We also gave his feathers a small makeover and decided to give them a bit more flow. We did this to just add a bit more energy to the pose. For the colors I used brighter colors than the original, because I wanted this Pokemon to be able to fight with flair. We also played around with different colored eyes. I eventually settled on a bright blue color, and I really think this makes the piece pop. I know the orange color would have made for a more aesthetic design, but sometimes you just have to use a different accent color in order to give the viewer something to focus on. Flaring Strike, an avian from the past. Flaring Strike holds more power than it may seem. It can kick its legs at speeds of 50 km per hour and leaves its targets with severe burns. It loves to ambush other Pokemon, and it seems to take pleasure in hurting others. I think this is a pretty cool design. Is it the best one ever? Probably not. But I do think it could be a perfect segue into an amazing dinosaur like Blaziken. Since we decided to use all the Mega forms for the Hoenn starters, we had to use Mega Blaziken for this one as well. The goal for this Pokemon was to make him into a dragon fighting type. This meant that it wouldn't be a fire type anymore, so we had to figure out what to do with the straps on his arms. I made the decision to give him draconic ribbons instead, which would play into both of the typings. We also extended the eyebrows and the horn on his head, and we brought back in the tail, which we used for the first 2 stages. I must say that I struggled pretty hard on the color palette for this one. I don't really like the color palette of Mega Blaziken, so I tried to make a mix between that form and the regular one. I do think the end result looks too much like an electric type, but we fixed that for the shiny. Martial Monarch. This Pokemon seems to be a devoted follower of the ways of Koraidon. It trains itself up until the point of exhaustion in order to be strong enough to defend its leader. They strike at incredible speeds with the draconic energy emitting from their bodies. I'm still not convinced on his color palette, but that's why the shiny looks the way it does. My take on the shiny was what this Pokemon probably would look like without the Paradox color rules. I decided to just tweak the original art and not even make a sketch. This sped up the process by a long time, and this might actually be my favorite design of all of them. But I'm probably biased because Mudkip is amazing. For the colors I really didn't change much for this guy. The only thing I did was add a screen for his face where you have the light eyes again, and the other colors just basically stayed the same. Iron Fin. It is thought by some to be an underwater camera drone made by an alien race. We have not yet to confirm this rumor, but it does appear to come very close to you, and it loves to be petted. Might this be a strategy to spy on you, or is it just a friendly Pokemon? I have to say that if this Pokemon was real, I would instantly go for a shiny. And yeah, this Pokemon might actually be a good contender for one of my favorite Pokemon. For this design I struggled a bit because the first stage had a detached body part and I didn't really know what to do with the tails of this one. I eventually just decided to keep them attached because the pose looked a lot more balanced in this way. I know this design doesn't change a lot, but Iron Fin didn't either. This makes me think that you don't necessarily have to make big changes to make a good design. I think the gloves, rubber patches and especially the eyes gives him such a robotic look that he doesn't even need anything else. I've always loved Hoenn starters, and by seeing this dude be so happy, I love them even more. Iron Wake. Similarly to Iron Fin, this Pokemon seems to be made for the purpose of research. It can navigate very well in wet areas like swamps. With its highly sensitive paws, it can pick up items of interest in order to scan them for the chemical components. It is unsure what or who all this information is for. I am so happy with this piece. You just can't hate on his cute face. I do have to say that I'm very curious to see what this evolves into now. I wanted to do something different for this piece. Mega Swampert is my favorite design out of all the designs in the entire franchise. It makes me quite sad that I might not be able to ever see it back in the games. This is why I decided to base this evolution onto Mega Swampert instead of the regular one. I knew I could do that because they did the exact same thing for Roaring Moon. This means that it will also have a higher stat total than the other final stages I made. The design itself went by pretty easily, because if you look at the regular design, it already has a lot of robotic features. I was able to add onto it by making his arms look a bit segmented and by adding a few lines into the design, which gave it a lot of depth. Take the lines above his eyes for example. They are just simple straight lines, but it instantly looks more 3D. I was biased about this design from the start, but I fell in love so hard when I dropped in the colors. The mix between the robotic shapes and colors and the colors of regular Swampert makes it look incredible. I also tried to make the shading look a bit more reflective than I usually do, and I think that finished up the design perfectly. Iron Bulk. This Pokemon is designed to assist as effectively as possible during disasters related to water, like floods, dam breaks, or mudslides. With its immense strength, it can easily move rubble and debris. Even though this Pokemon is not a water type anymore, it still swims at extremely high speeds. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I'm going to top this design, at least for me. I just knew Thirdwig had a lot of potential to be turned prehistoric. I did struggle a bit to find something I was happy with, especially the plan on his head was difficult to get right. I did eventually manage to get an incredible design by just adding small features like his teeth, tiny claws, pointier head, horns and a bigger shell. For the colors I did what I usually do for past forms, keep them very similar but just a bit darker. I am very proud of this piece, and I really think you guys will love him too. Thorny Twig. It is said that Thorny Twig was a carnivorous beast who speedily and stealthily attacked their prey. It blends in perfectly with nature whenever it lays still enough. It eventually started feeding on plants, which made running no longer necessary. As a result, it lost its speed, and its descendants are far slower than their ancestors once were. Even though this Pokemon might look cute, don't try to pet it. It's very dangerous because of its incredible bite force. Man, I love this design so much. It was definitely worth the wait. I also really like the shiny. I did change the color of its leaf, so it would actually differ a bit from its original shiny. This design started out as a big struggle. We removed the leaves on its back, which made him lose a big part of his identity. I don't think it always has to be a bad thing, but we definitely needed to bring back at least some of those leaves into the design. We managed to do so by adding them to its belly, a little bit like chest hair. We also gave his head an extra armored feeling and made his shell look like the beginning of Rocky Mountains. I think this is a perfect transition into the final evolution I have in mind. This version is still a grass rock type, and I'm planning to make Torterra into a rock ground type instead. Imagine Torterra not as a walking forest, but as a walking set of mountains. I think that would look sick. I also added other armor pieces, and we kept the rhinoceros horns to make the design feel even sturdier. The colors we used were just a darker variant of the colors of Thorny Twig. We did also play around with a red eye instead of the yellow one, but that just didn't look good, so we eventually changed it back into a yellow one. Mossy Cliff. Unlike his first stage, this Pokemon likes to hunt by laying still and blending in with nature perfectly. It can go long periods without food, because it only moves if it's absolutely necessary. Only the few trainers that have been able to convince this Pokemon to be caught have seen what an unmovable powerhouse this Pokemon actually is. I think that this Pokemon received the most name suggestions from my community of all the pieces. A lot of them were fantastic, and I just want to thank everyone who left a comment for these names. We already decided in which direction we wanted to go for this line, swapping the grass type for a ground one. This meant that we had to figure out a way to change the tree on Torterra's back into something that fits his new typing better. My idea for this was to convert a tree into rocky mountains instead. While there were suggestions to incorporate waterfalls or small Pokemon into the design, it was important to me to maintain a size that would be feasible within the games. However, I might be able to do something with that in the lore department. I do think the concept of it being huge is awesome, so I decided to make his tongue emulate a waterfall, which would A, fit the mountain look, and B, reference real life turtle tongues that bathe in fish by pretending to be a worm. We also added in a bit of moss onto his back to give him an overgrown ancient aesthetic. I did hesitate on his colors. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go for regular Torterra's color palette or if I wanted to use the colors we used for Mossy Cliff. In the end we decided to go for the last option and use the regular Torterra colors for his shiny. Striding Hills. This Pokemon is rarely seen moving, but when it does, the very ground quivers beneath its weight. As a master of camouflage, it entices smaller Pokemon, posing as a source of water, only to ensnare them with its powerful jaws. Scientists believe that this Pokemon never stops growing, and legends say that every mountain has one of these guys under them. I'm very happy with the end result of this guy. I really like how we implemented snapping turtle aspects into the design. This was another pretty easy design to convert into a future form, but it did take me some time to figure out how to make his eyes work. I eventually settled on dark screen-like circles on his face, and I think that worked out great. At some point I was testing if I could put the lava lamp kind of feel on his head as well, but I'm glad I didn't do that. For the colors we just changed the pale yellow for a dark grey color. I would have loved to give the shiny blue flames, because that's just the way you should make flames into a shiny color. But yeah, that's just not how Paradox Pokemon work. Iron Monkey. This Pokemon may look cute and friendly, but rumors have it that it's actually very mean. Only the toughest trainers can handle this Pokemon, and even they have struggles with the obedience of this little demon. It loves to bully other Pokemon, and it can do that very well with the huge amount of firepower it has. At one point I wasn't really sure if this drawing would come together, but I do think the end result is amazing. This really looks like a robotic Chimchar, and I'm really happy someone suggested to detach his head from its body. This made the design way more unique, and I love it. I got a lot of feedback on my future forms. A lot of you didn't want me to detach limbs, but in my last video a lot of you actually missed them as well. This made me realize that you don't always have to detach limbs on these designs, but if you do it properly, the designs will actually benefit from it. I also started working with reference of the real Paradox Pokemon, which gave me a lot more insights on future forms. A few of these tiny details are the segmented tail, toes and fingers. I also noticed that they have wiggly round parts on their body, and I think that is supposed to portray a rubbery texture. With all of these elements combined, I think we've made another perfect future form. For the colors I referenced Iron Monkey, because I just want to keep the evolution line aesthetic the same. Iron Knuckles. After evolution, this Pokemon gains a huge boost in its fighting skills and starts to train on everything it sees. This makes them extremely dangerous because their intentions are not to help, but to harm others. It does appear to lose some of its fighting spirit once it has reached a certain level of skills. At first I wanted to name this guy Iron Fist, but that name is so good that I wanted to keep that for Infernape's form. I know a lot of you guys still don't like these shinies, but come on, a robotic monkey. That's awesome. This was one of those pieces where the objective for it was so clear from the start that it wasn't really an issue to put it onto paper. We used the exact same feature changes we did for Monferno, like the detached arms and the segmented tail and fingers. We did do something different which we didn't do for Monferno, which was making the fur look blocky like we did for many of the future forms. I did struggle a bit on deciding the right color palette. Regular Infernape uses a lot of white in the design, but that just doesn't really look good with the added black colors. This is why I decided to make his feet black as well, to hopefully make it look better. Iron Fist. Even though this Pokemon might not be as aggressive as his second stage once was, its sole purpose is still to harm others. It has become a lot stronger with this new form, so not even the bigger Pokemon are safe. We have a strong feeling this Pokemon was designed for an evil organization. Is Team Rocket still a thing in the future? I have to admit that this piece is probably the only piece of the final stages which I don't really like. I think it has something to do with the color palette, but I just wasn't able to fix it. Well, it is what it is. Making a future form isn't necessarily difficult. You don't really change a lot. You mostly keep the design the same and then just detach some of its body parts and add some rubber patches as well. My biggest struggle for this piece was to decide on which color would be the lava lamp kind of feel. I eventually settled on the yellow parts, but when I was done with the piece, I wasn't really happy with it. Luckily, when I was working on another future form, I discovered that Iron Hood actually had some shading in the lava lamp as well. This brought me back to all my future forms and I fixed them. Man, who would know that the future me would actually fix a future form? Iron Pengu. This red creature can be heard from miles away. It appears to make sonar sounds, somewhat similar to this. Noot noot. It also doesn't like to be taken care of. It's very difficult to bond with, since it won't listen to its trainer, even though it might be hard to control. It is very much sought after because of its incredible power. At first, when I finished this piece, I was not happy with it at all. Luckily, I did manage to fix it with the added highlights. I think it's a very cute design. And like I've said before, the shinies of iron forms actually grew on me quite a lot. Look at that cute little robot penguin. This was one of those designs where I just flew through the process. We did make a mistake with the typing for his first stage that we had to rectify. We made Iron Pengu a water steel type, but that is kinda boring since his final evolution usually has that typing as well. This is why we decided to swap the steel typing to a water electric type. We might bring back the steel typing for his final evolution, but we'd combine it with the electric typing instead of water. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk a bit more about the design itself. The first stage actually had his arms detached, but I didn't feel like that would work for this piece too. This is why I decided to scrap it and add a few details to make the design look interesting without those kind of arms. We gave him shoulder patches, added black parts to the end of his arms and gave him the rubber patch on its belly. I connected the dots on its belly with that rubber effect in order to sell our wanted typing. For the colors we just used the regular colors of Primplop and referenced the lightest colors of Iron Pengu. Iron Waddle. This Pokemon is thought to be a helper for Arctic rescue teams. It uses its sharp flippers to dig through snow and ice, and its electric powers to illuminate the land in snowstorms. It is capable to provide someone in need with water and can also heat up its body so they can stay warm. I love this design very much. This is a trademark piece for my Paradoxmons. They change a lot, but they don't. We started out by replacing the white on his body with a rubber patch. We of course added in the lines next to it in order to add some depth into the design. We did need to add something on the place where the circles were on the bottom of his white belly. I thought basic yellow pins would work and I was right. Our next step was to bring in the yellow shoulder patches, but I decided to make them spiky instead of round for this one. The last thing we did were the segmentation of the wings, and we prepared his face for the screen-like eyes. The color palette of Empoleon already looks pretty good, but I think the extra yellow parts made it even better. Iron Emperor. The origin of this Pokemon is unclear. Some say it is a tyrant trying to conquer land to expand his territory, while others say it is benevolent and tries to help people in need. One thing is for certain, this Pokemon is incredibly smart and holds a huge amount of strength. This was one of those pieces where I realized how robot-like the original design looks. We just didn't have to change much to make Empoleon feel like a real robot. For the future forms we've done so far, we didn't really change much. We basically made certain features float and gave them a robotic makeover. I know that is sort of what a future form is through their conventions, but I wanted to see if I could change it up a bit. This is why I gave Snivy sights on his body, to give him a new way of fighting. This is at least different from the original design, and it might make him a bit more memorable. Ironcide is a very cunning and malicious Pokemon. It uses its energy sights to slice its enemies from behind. These sights can extend and deform in different ways, making it very difficult to get a safe attack in on him. The energy created by these sights appears to be extremely hot, as a large amount of trees with burnt cuts can be seen near their dens. A viewer of mine said he didn't really like this piece, but that was probably because I kept the same colors for almost the entire drawing process. I am glad I eventually changed the colors to fit the robotic theme more. I definitely wanted to keep the same aesthetic the first form had. I achieved this by making his neck into blades instead of sights. I then decided to make the leaves on its tail float in order to give the rest of the design a little bit of space. Since this Pokemon is based upon a snake, I thought it would have been a cool idea to segment his entire body. I think it looks awesome, and it's definitely something I picked up by looking at the reference. I didn't change any of the colors either, but I did decide to add the lighted areas into the leaves on its tail as well. I thought the design would benefit from a bit more color in it. Iron Blade. This mysterious machine believes it's superior to all other Pokemon and humans. It tries to command them, and it throws tantrums when they deny its commands. Only the best trainers are capable to use Iron Blade, as it's thought to be impossible to train. I must admit that this color scheme makes him look a little bit like corn, but a beautiful looking piece of corn then. I am very curious to see what we'll do with his evolution, because this line is sick so far. I don't really have too much to say about this design. We just repeated all the steps we did for the first two forms. I did swap the swords away from its neck, because I didn't think they would fit there anymore. I definitely wanted to keep that element, so I brought it back at the tip of its tail. At the end, this design was just meant to become a snake, built out of segments, and I think we've nailed that concept. The colors are just the same as the middle stage, but the shiny is where this piece actually shines. Iron Serpent. The tail of this Pokemon is strong enough to cut through steel objects. However, they usually use it to groom themselves, cutting away imperfect pieces of steel to make unique patterns. In battle for territory, these Pokemon compare each other's style instead of traditional battles. The Iron Servant with the longest and most unique patterns is most likely to win. I am actually quite happy with this piece. It isn't necessarily the most unique thing you'll ever see, but I think it works just right. For this design, we thought it would be a good idea to make him into a fire-electric type. This gave us a perfect direction to base some of his features on. I think the fact that he looks like a charger and a lamp is really cool. I do have to say that I struggled quite a bit on the colors for this design, mainly because the original Tepic uses a dark brown color on its body, which makes the robotic grey colors not stand out as much. When I added the shading into this piece, the piece actually came together, but it could have been better. Iron Snout. This Pokemon is usually pretty drowsy and sleeps a lot, but it gets very active when exposed to electric charges. We theorized that Iron Snout can charge itself using its head protrusions to connect to charging stations. The light bulb on its tail shines brightly when this Pokemon is charged up, and it activates sensors on its snout. We assume that this Pokemon's snout could be a heat-seeking device, but there haven't been enough tests done to confirm this theory. In the end, the design came together quite nicely, but I think it could have been better with a different color palette. I do have to say that it's a very good concept, and it fits the typing perfectly. I really love the design we made for Tepic, so I knew I had to step up for this one as well. We decided to continue the features we used for the first form, like the electric ears, the belly patch, and a unique tail. Someone in my chat suggested to make the light bulb into a lantern, and I love that idea. I think it's a perfect mix of the fire and electric typing. It was actually my first time drawing such a literal 3D shape, but I do think it came together after some tweaking. I am extremely happy how the belly piece turned out. We referenced Iron Hand's design, and those little lines on top really give off metallic energy. I did also think about changing some of the yellow parts on its design into lighted ones. I did eventually move away from that idea because I noticed the yellow accent color is necessary for this color palette. This is why I added another accent color to the lighted areas, because I still think it looked a bit flat on the first stage. Iron Lantern, this big robotic pig, is a popular companion with older trainers, as it's usually grumpy and tired. It uses its lantern to provide light for their trainer and loves to read a book together. Even though this Pokemon can be quite stubborn, it's a formidable foe under the wing of an experienced trainer. This has to be one of the coolest designs I've made so far. I really love this line and nothing can top this shiny. The first change we implemented was to bring back the electrical ears. We then had to figure out a way to use the tail for another combination between the electric and the fire typing. My idea for this stage was that he would carry a big spotlight on his shoulder instead of the lantern. The final changes were basically the transformation of a lot of the organic shapes into the blocky ones we usually give these future forms. This drawing really came to life when I added in the colors, and I'm really happy with the final addition to this line. Iron Spotlight. This Pokemon is often used in lighthouses to guide the oncoming ships to safety with the big spotlight it carries at all times. In battle it uses its spotlight as a fire cannon, setting whatever it aims at on fire. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of the original line of these Pokemon, this has to be one of the best futuristic lines we made. To keep my sanity in check, I challenged myself to make this under an hour. If I wasn't able to do so, I would have had to give 5 gifted memberships to my viewers and delete a shiny. Luckily, I went into full speed mode and I managed to pull it off. I think that this piece looks pretty cool and I wouldn't really know what else to do with Oshawott. I do want to give you guys another quick tip, which is use rim lights on your pieces. A rim light gives a bit of lighting to shaded areas. It could really help to make your pieces pop. Iron Shell seems to be a futuristic form of Oshawott. It appears to be a friendly Pokemon who likes to stand up for his friends. If anyone attacked their friends, they will blast them away with their huge amounts of water and ice powers. They have been spotted more and more recently, and it appears that they've made Area Zero into a much safer place. I don't really know if I like this piece or not. Like, it does have some good futuristic features, but it doesn't strike me as an amazing Pokemon. But that might also be because I don't really like Oshawott either. I'm still not that happy how our future form of Oshawott turned out. This is why I had to change some things up in order to make this evolution actually into something that looks cool. I tried to achieve this by switching up which parts would be the lighted area. I also converted his arms into robotic ones, so he would instantly look more like a robot, unlike his first form. This wasn't enough though. Our current design didn't feel like it would fit the ice typing at all, so I came up with the idea to give him an actual sword. I knew I could do this because Iron Valiant does the exact same thing. I'm actually very happy we decided to do this, because this gave the design the extra thing it needed to be complete. For the colors I kept most of them the same. I did play around with making the shells lighted up as well, but the design would have lost a very important accent color, so we moved away from that idea. Iron Edge. This Pokemon seems to be so strict with itself, it sets up a training schedule where it even schedules the time it spends on standby mode. It practices with its ice cool swords daily, and even though it's a robotic Pokemon, it seems to greatly respect the warrior spirit and aspires to become a master of the sword itself. I am so happy with this upgrade. It really shows how much I've grown since the start of this challenge, and it makes me so hyped that I'm getting better. Our piece for Duat is still one of the best future forms we made. It didn't lose the feeling of the Pokemon, but it isn't just a robotic version either. I wanted to make sure we made that happen for this piece as well. We tried to do so by giving him the blade onto his head, which makes it look a bit more natural. The biggest other changes were made to his belly. We made sure to add some depth to that area by using the metallic line trick we learned from studying Iron Hands. If you're not sure what that trick is, let me explain it to you. The main thing you do is draw a simple line above the shape you want to give the 3D look. Make sure your line follows the direction of the shape. If it's a square shape, you will have to use a straight line, which you can see in the upper part of his belly. If it's a round shape, you will have to use a rounded line. This can be seen in the middle of his belly. After that, you will need the shade in that area to give it the optimal look. Et voila! Your piece looks a lot more robotic. Iron Samurai. This Pokemon is a very noble and hardened creature. It will only fight opponents which it finds equal to them. If two of these species come across each other, they have an hour-long battle to see which one of them is superior. Once the outcome of this battle is clear, they greet each other with respect and go back on their way. I'm not sure if everyone will agree with me on this, but I think this is a perfect future form. I've really managed to fit in all those robotic shapes, but we also added something extra, which most of the future forms do. Only less than 10% of you guys are actually subscribed. Don't get me wrong, it's amazing that so many of you are subscribed, but I'm not done with making Paradox Pokemon, and I'm currently working on all the legendaries, so if you wanna see those, please consider subscribing. We thought of a few different ideas for this piece. We tried giving him a big afro, but it didn't really fit him. We eventually settled on big ears, because the spikes on his head already look like the inner parts of ears. So why not give him just actual ears? We also made the green thing on his head to look like a helmet. This resulted in him looking a lot more fierce and protected. Someone in my chat suggested that we make his primary feature a poisonous tail, because we already decided on his grass poison typing. This made the design look a lot more interesting, and it was just a perfect fit for this typing. Venomous Needle. The reason Venomous Needle covers itself with poison remains unknown to this day, as they weren't seen producing these toxins. We are suspecting that this Pokemon's fur and thick skin prevents poison getting into their bodies, though it's still up for debate. They seem to be pretty rude and like to start battles with Pokemon around their size. The results of these battles vary a lot. It does seem they act tougher than they actually are. This piece took me quite a while to get to a point I was happy with him. Now that I actually see it fully rendered out and see it shiny, I actually think it looks freaking sick. This design went by pretty quickly because we had quite an easy concept to work with. I did think about changing it up a bit by giving him a rocket launcher as tail, but that would have been more fitting for a future form, so we just turned the spikes on his head to ears and we gave him a scorpion-like tail. The rest of the changes were mostly me trying to use the changes we made for Chespin, like the piece of fur in the middle of its body and the poisonous teeth. We also tweaked the green parts again to emulate the armored look we had for the first stage. The goal for this Pokemon was to make him feel stronger and a lot more defensive. I think we managed to do so because that tail definitely looks like it can withstand a lot more shots to it. At first I wasn't really sure about this design, but I had the exact same feeling for Venomous Needle. This feeling disappeared for both of these drawings when I put in the shading, because it looks sick now. Barbaric Thorn. This Pokemon seems to be a predator of an ancient world. It's able to shoot thorns covered in a unique toxin that will paralyze its target, which it would then drag away into its burrow before tearing it apart with its sharp fangs and claws. One dart is said to be enough to fully paralyze a full-grown Salamence. Quilladin is still one of my least favorite starters out of them all, but this design made me dislike him quite a bit less. But quite a bit less will probably still keep him at the bottom tier. It was quite difficult to come up with a good design for this Pokemon. This was the case because we went for a scorpion tail for the previous designs, and I wasn't really sure how to implement it into this one as well. We eventually settled on a blade on the tip of the tail, but I felt like that didn't add enough. This is why I decided to give him blades on the side of his arms to give him a unique way of fighting against his opponents. Just imagine this Pokemon balancing his attack moves with the blades on his arms and tail, followed up by blocking attacks with the shield on his back. I can really imagine how it fluently switches between attacking and defending, almost like Aegislash does. I also made sure to make his shield a bit spikier in order to make him look a bit more feral. We also extended his fur up until the point of it almost looking like a full-grown beard, so he would look more experienced. The color decisions I made were just a slightly darker version of the regular one, and once again, The shading finished up this piece beautifully. Noxious Dagger. This Pokemon is so large and intimidating that most other species tend to avoid them altogether. Because of this, it rarely has to use the sharp blades to protect himself. He does use these blades in order to hunt down its prey. When his prey has been hit only once, the toxins then instantly paralyze the target, unlike his previous stage. I never really liked the Chespin line, but it definitely got better after I made all of these designs. Even though I know Pokemon would never use my Fakemon in their games, I would love to see this fighting style in a different Pokemon. Some of these future designs are really easy to pull off. I'm talking about the black part on their faces. For this piece, not so much. I had to improvise which part would be the black around the eyes, and since Fennekin doesn't have one, I just decided to make a little mask-like thing. The rest of the design was actually pretty easy. I knew from the start I was going to pull out the ear thingies and give them the lava lamp kind of feel. Man, I really need a different word for that. The colors just stay the same on these things, but the shiny really makes it look better. Iron Fox, this unruly looking creature, keeps popping up more and more lately. It does appear to be friendly, but it can be very intimidating if he doesn't like you. Our tests so far show that their ears are capable of producing immense amount of heat. Combined with the psychic power from their eyes, they are a truly powerful foe. What I love about this design is that it's very simple, yet effective. It really does look like a robot, even though we didn't change much. For this piece I went hard on all the blockier and pointier shapes. This made such a big difference that it made me sad I didn't do this earlier. We also took some inspiration from Iron Valiant and we made the middle part of her body into the rubber texture. Further changes were the segmented legs, hands, and we changed her stick into the lighted area as well. I did think that I made another mistake by making Iron Fox into a fire psychic type, but now that I think about it, it could actually be sick to turn the final evolution into a psychic dark type. Imagine an evil looking, robotic dark mage Delphox. A mouthful, but that would be awesome. For the colors I used a dark color for her legs and just kept the yellow and red colors the same. Iron Torch. This Pokemon seems to be wary of human contact. Researchers have not been able to get close to one yet. It appears to use illusions in order to mislead any danger coming in their way, which makes it almost impossible to catch. I think that this design might be the closest design to a real Paradox Pokemon. I really think that Pokemon might have used a similar design for Braixen if they did actually decide to make it into a future form. We started out by making a lot of her features more blocky, just like we did for the second stage. These features were mostly the fur she has on her design, but we also did it for the tail. Our next change we made was to segment her fingers and toes. This always helps a lot to make it feel more robotic. After that, we added a rubber patch in the middle of her body and we used the depth trick again. I did get some feedback on our Braixen forum where the person didn't like that it didn't do anything for the stick. This is why I decided to add a handle in the middle of this one instead of just making the entire thing a lighted part. I do have to say that it's quite difficult to make these Pokemon feel like the new typing we want, because we still have to use the same color palette to fit it into the evolution line. Iron Witch. Rumors say that Iron Torch lost his fiery, cheerful spirit after a certain traumatic event. This made it evolve into this new form. It is known to cast hexes and curses on those that it despises without warning. This only causes misfortune to those unsuspecting of its immense mystical powers. I've never really loved Delphox before, but when I see the shiny of this form, I could actually see myself using this Pokemon. This was another design where we decided this typing quite early in the drawing process. This is just a fantastic way to lay out a path to follow for a good Pokemon design. There might be an argument that it looks too similar to a regional variant, so we did try to add some teeth and horns as well. We also shifted to sharp and pointy edges instead of the bubble frill he has on his regular form. This made him look a lot less friendly, which definitely helps for the feral look we're going for. For the colors I had to make them a bit different in order to fit the poison type. We went for a dark bluish color for his body with the bright pink accent colors for his frill. Even though the colors are vastly different, I did manage to bring them back for its shiny. Spiky Bubbles. This Pokemon is very rebellious. It grabs sludge pieces from its neck collar and throws at everyone it sees. This poison is strong enough to eat through metal. They do seem to be immune to their own poison due to their diet consisting of poisonous plants. Spiky Bubbles don't get along particularly well, so they usually live alone. I absolutely adore this piece. I really love the way I've rendered it, and I would 100% be a member of my team. The shiny looks freaking sick, but I don't think it would have worked as his original colors. I have to say that I didn't really struggle on this piece. It was kinda nice we had a direction to follow from the start, instead of having to come up with an entirely new concept. It was also fun to build out the concept even further by making his features bigger, like his teeth, the neck color, some of his claws and the points on his knee. For the colors I decided to use a darker version of the colors we used on Froakie, because in my opinion this makes him look more experienced and older. I'm still very much in love with this color palette. I just really think the bright pink stands out perfectly to the dark blue color on its body. Sharpened Gunk. It isn't common for a Paradox Pokemon to evolve. Some more research is needed to better explore this phenomenon. Spiky Bubbles is the first species we've seen evolving, but rumors say that others are soon to follow. It seems that this version is a lot faster and more intelligent. Its poison's chemical structure changed to include a toxin that can put its enemies to sleep after some time. This makes it easier for them to chase down and defeat their enemies. I am extremely happy how this piece turned out, and it was nice to build out our first character a bit. I also really like the shinies for this line, because they look quite similar to their regular forms. We started out by adding the features we used for the first two stages, like the pink back spikes, the tusks, and we gave him those tiny claws. I do have to say that it was actually quite difficult to bring back the tusks into the design, since there was one big detail which the first two stages didn't have. The tongue. We decided to give his tongue a lot of spikes to make it feel like he could stick to things, pretty similar to a cat's tongue. It is kind of funny that we're already noticing the difference between making final stages and making the first or even the second stages. The design of the third evolutions is a lot more complicated, which sometimes makes it difficult to add more details into it. For the colors of the body, I thought it would be a cool idea to make it slightly darker with each evolution. It also helped the pink color stand out a lot more. Greninja does add another accent color to the palette, but I decided not to use it in order to keep the dark aesthetic. Stealthy Toxin. Evolution made this Pokemon one of the most cunning and patient yet violent creatures in Area Zero. It can move at astonishing speeds, but can also stand very still, making absolutely no sound to ambush its opponents. It creates star-shaped weapons from the poisonous spikes on its body, which it can throw with enough force to pierce a large boulder. I think we've created a good third member for this evolution line. It definitely still resembles Greninja, and we were able to use all the design features we used on the first two stages. At first I didn't really like the future Paradox forms, but since I made this drawing, I've actually fallen in love with the idea. The future designs are mainly just the base design, but then with a black screen-like thing on their head, where the eyes look more like lights than actual eyes. They also replace certain features with a lava lamp kind of feel. At first I wasn't really a fan of the shinies for these guys, because they are just colorless. But since I put them on my own drawings, I actually get why they did that. From the moment you put in the shiny colors, it immediately sells as a robot, which is fantastic. Iron Hood. This Pokemon is said to be a weird organism with a relatively simple mechanism. The coding does appear to be incredibly advanced though. Nobody knows who created this creature, but it does still appear to love cuddles. The name Iron Hood? Fantastic. Thank you so much, Benjamin. I definitely think this could be sold as a futuristic form of Rowlet. The fact that its wings aren't attached to its body anymore, and that he has those light-like eyes, instantly sells him as a robot to me. If you're not convinced that he is a robot, just look at his shiny. I was kinda hyped to make this piece, since I learned a lot because of all of the feedback you guys gave me. A lot of you pointed out that future forms don't need detached limbs, but you could just add hinges to the parts on their designs. This was really helpful and gave me some new insights. I do quickly need to say that if you don't like my pieces, it doesn't help to just call them awful. I can't make them better if you don't tell me what you dislike on them. So just use constructive criticism in order for me to make some designs you might actually like. Having that out of the way, the drawing went pretty smooth. We wanted to portray the electric typing a bit more clearly, that's why I decided to make some of his features have sharper and pointier edges. I did also think about making the lighted areas yellow, but I didn't want to stray too far away from Rowlet's design, so I just went with the green color. Iron Wing. Evolution made this Pokemon lazier and more selfish, which is the opposite from its previous stage. Despite that, they become wiser and share that knowledge with anyone who treats them with respect and honor. They seem to be intelligent enough to operate some of human technologies, though only when they are really bored and don't have anyone near to share their knowledge with. Some of their species were seen leading small groups of their previous stages, acting as a guide. I think this is a perfect second stage to our friend Iron Hood. I especially like that he looks kinda sassy, which really fits the know-it-all personality. I think this shiny looks incredible as well, and I would 100% hunt this thing. I can already tell you we made a big mistake for this piece. I had an incredibly cool concept in mind, but I totally forgot that I was supposed to fit it in the evolution line. My goal for the Decidueye was to make him look like a ghostly electric type with translucent legs. We even built out this concept until the point of coloring, but at that point I realized that we went in the wrong direction. Even though it is a very cool design, it just completely ignores the features of the first two stages. We also gave him quite a few details, which made him look a bit more like a past form as well. I didn't want to make a new concept, because I do still think it's a pretty cool paradox form. We eventually decided that we might be able to bring back at least some evolution line feeling by changing his colors to fit the first two more. Iron Archer. Upon evolving, this Pokemon turned into a vicious hunter. It uses its intelligence for dealing with its prey. The eyes of this Pokemon seem to be able to focus to the point of perfectly seeing 30 kilometers away. They're able to hear the most quiet of sounds in their surroundings. Once they detect their prey, they shoot out a spirit-like lightning bolt, which takes out even the biggest Pokemon. We're thinking that the same energy it uses to attack keeps them awake at all times as well. Like I said, this design is pretty cool, but if we're talking about an evolution line, I really failed on this one. We did make this piece before almost all the second stages, which helped us a lot to make most of my designs a lot better. If we're going to talk about this drawing, it was actually fairly easy to design. Litten itself felt a bit bland, so I just kept adding more details which fitted him perfectly. I'm talking about more hair, bigger teeth and claws for example. I did struggle a lot on the drawing of the claws. It was tough to get the right trajectory on them and they still aren't perfect, but I just couldn't bother anymore. I think my favorite part of the design has to be the eyebrows. They add so much character and expression to the design, which I'm very happy with. For the colors, I decided to give his body a slightly darker blue color and opted into a less orange type of red for the accents. I do still quickly want to mention that the shiny of this piece looks incredible as well. Flaming Fangs. This past ancestor of Litten is difficult to encounter as they're patrolling groups around the dark parts of Area 0. The few people that have managed to come close to this Pokemon have not came out unscathed. It seems that Flaming Fangs are extremely aggressive, which is terrifying because they hunt in groups. The biggest Flaming Fang appears to be the leader of this pack, as it commands the other members to gather most of the food because of its laziness. This is another design which has to be one of my favorite ones out of them all. I still really love the design I made for Litten, so I actually felt confident to make this into a banger as well. For the first stage we added quite a few details, which made him look a lot hairier. I wanted to continue this trend, because that really sells the feral look we're going for. I do want to mention that we made the first stage into a fire steel type, but I didn't want to go into the steel direction, so we changed him into a fire ground type. This also resulted in a replacement of his long claws, which we changed into big fire claws. I think that is way more epic, but we did still keep his long fangs. I just wanted to keep this option open to maybe transform Incineroar into a saber-tooth like cat. I already got a bunch of requests to keep him quadrupedal, so I will definitely have to look into that for the evolution. For the colors, we just referenced the first stage and we made them just a slightly bit darker. I think the shiny for this piece looks awesome as well, because we swapped the orange flames for blue ones. Burning Claws. Upon evolving, this Pokemon splits off from the group of flaming fangs to live on their own. The condensed energy around its claws makes it extremely efficient at climbing and digging. It's estimated that it would even be able to dig through the frozen dirt in the tundra if it wanted to. When this Pokemon finds its food, it prefers to take it up to higher places and buries it so others can't get to it. I got a lot of requests to keep this line quadrupedal, and I really tried to do so. I tried tweaking the pose of Torracat, but it kept looking like a fusion between the two instead of their own Pokemon. I spent around 1.5 hours of trying, but I just wasn't able to pull it off, so I'm sorry guys, maybe next time. However, I did make another design. I knew I would have to make it one of the best ones you've ever seen, because I just know you guys otherwise wouldn't forgive me. The goal for this piece was to make him look a lot hairier and to finish him off with incredibly big burning arms. Now that I was going to give him burning arms, I didn't want to keep the fire belt as well. I thought it would be cool to replace the fire belt with one made out of coal. This would fit his part ground type and it would work perfectly together with the fire. My idea for this Pokemon was that it would burn the coal and throw it at his enemies. Once I put in all these specific details, it was time to put in the colors. I decided to go for slightly darker variants again, and I think he looks awesome combined with the coal. Blazing Belt. Most researchers say that this Pokemon can't create fire at will. It can only generate enough bomb through a lot of physical work. As a result, they tend to use strong and heavy moves to build up their fire faster. They carry cool belts on them to train their endurance and to help the fire spread faster to their bodies and the bodies of their enemies. I am still kinda sad I wasn't able to pull off the quadrupedal cat, but I do have to say that this design cheered me up quite a lot. This was another one where I was quite confident that I would be able to pull it off easily. Luckily, I was right this time. It didn't take me long to get a good grip of where I wanted to go with this piece. I really think that this is my second favorite future form I've made so far, even though I don't really like Popplio itself. Iron Flipper. This Pokemon is able to snort body fluids from its nose. It forms large bubbles, which are extremely powerful. Iron Flipper does look similar to Popplio, but this form seems to have psychic powers as well. Luckily, it does appear to be friendly, and a great tool for diving excursions. I can't believe I managed to make a form of Popplio I actually like. This was just a starter I never really bonded with. I do think I've done him justice with this form, and that the Popplio fans will probably agree with me on that. This was an easy design to make, since Brionne is basically almost the exact same design as Popplio. The only hard part of this drawing was to figure out how to implement a rubber patch into its body. We also played around with robotic features onto its flippers, but I felt like it didn't really fit the design. There weren't many other changes, except for the gloss, the lighted areas and a screen onto its face. For the colors we just went for a slightly darker blue for its body. We did this because the lighted areas wouldn't stand out as much if the body had such a light color. Iron Braids. Like its previous form, this Pokemon will help divers during underwater missions. It will provide them with companionship and can lift up any debris using its psychic powers. They are also known to help children learn to swim by paddling with them and lifting them out of the water if anything goes wrong. I wouldn't say this form is as good as the first form was, but I do think it's a fitting evolution for it. Just like the first two pieces we did for this line, we didn't have to make too many changes. We did have to make sure that we gave the right areas the light, so we wouldn't ruin the color palette. The biggest changes we made were the rubber patch on the middle of her body, the metallic flippers, and we decided to make her hair pink to fit our fairy psychic type. We then put in the colors, which basically stayed the same as the regular form, but with the pink hair instead of the blue one. Iron Siren. This Pokemon has many legends written about it. Some depict it as a guiding presence, leading lost divers to safety by telepathically soothing their minds amidst the depths of the ocean. Conversely, other tales cast a darker shadow, as sailors bewitched by its haunting melodies find themselves forever lost at sea. The veracity of these legends remain elusive, yet recent discoveries of abandoned ships lend credence to their existence. I do think this piece works as a future form, but I don't think it's my best one yet. For this piece, I sort of knew where I wanted to go with the design, but getting all the details in was actually quite difficult. I wanted to base him off of a caveman, which I tried to pull off by replacing his stick with a bone and making him hairier. I also learned something new from the last episode, which I was able to use in this design as well. When you choose his typing before you finish the drawing, you can actually base some of his features on the design conventions of that typing. This is how I got the idea to add mud to his arms and mouth, because it would turn out to be a grass and ground type. Whacking branch. This creature seems to live in groups up to 10 individuals. Though normally passive, they become very aggressive outside of their habitats. They will smack their opponents with the bones collected from their enemies. That smack generates enough force to smash a boulder into large pieces. They do seem to be fairly intelligent, seen by the interactions with our researchers, and because they create tools from natural materials. I do like this drawing, but it's not my favorite. I think it would have looked better with lighter colors, or maybe just colors based off of a caveman. That is why I gave him these darker colors, but I actually think humanoid colors would have looked better concept-wise. But yeah, it wouldn't really fit Grookey anymore. Our first stage definitely wasn't a bad design. I just think it could have been better with a different color palette. This is definitely something we have to take into consideration for this evolution. A lot of real past Paradox forms look quite similar to Rockstars, and let this design be perfect for that. The goal for this piece was to make him look similar to a drummer, but with the bones of his enemies. We tried to achieve this by making his hair a lot spikier, the leaves on his head to look like a mohawk, gave him wristbands, and changed his stick into bones. I want to move away from the sticky mud we went for with Grookey, so I decided to make his ground features look a lot like hardened clay. We tried to do so by making those features blocky and by giving them bright orange colors. Speaking about the colors, I went for way lighter colors than the first stage, and we made them look a lot less muddy. I think this piece is absolutely incredible, and I just know you guys will love it too. I do quickly want to mention that the lore suggested by my viewers was so good for this Pokemon, I just had to make an extended version of it. Rocking Bones. This Pokemon has a natural affinity for music. Valuing quality over quantity, it seems to be very particular about what bones it uses as its drumsticks. After the perfect bones are acquired, it makes sounds by hitting all kinds of surfaces and items with them. When it likes one sound in particular, it brings back the item to its lair to add to its collection of sounds. Once they start drumming on their collection, almost every single Pokemon in the jungle finds this melody beautiful and has to see the conductor. Other Pokemon then offer gifts to Rocking Bones, such as berries, which it uses as food. I am sorry for this long lore, but I'm not. This piece will definitely be high up on my list of favorites now. I couldn't find a good pose for Rillaboom, so I decided to try to make my own. I spent over an hour trying to get a good one, but I had to give up, since I'm not good enough at sketching anatomy yet. This is the exact reason why I'm tweaking the original art pieces, so I can still make something that closely resembles the original Pokemon. Now that we have that out of the way, it was time to go back and tweak such art piece. We started out by giving him a lot more leaves on his body, especially on the part under his chin, where it now looked like he has a beard. We also experimented with more leaves on his back, but that just cluttered up the silhouette, so we decided to move away from that idea. We did still want to do something with his back, but it had to be different from these leaves. My first thought was a skull-shaped drum, but from this side you wouldn't be able to see what it was supposed to look like. This is why I opted to give him a huge bone as a powerful drumstick. I still think that this was the best option, since it really fits the evolution line. Other changes were bigger leaves on his arm, clay bracelets, and we extended the spikes on his shoulders. Booming drums. This Pokemon is very aggressive until he has found the right bone to play music with. It can sometimes take them years to find one, and they have to slaughter many huge Pokemon in order to get the perfect one. Once they found their bone, They are very friendly because they can express their rage in their music. This piece almost made me lose my sanity. I hate it when I'm not able to do something, so it sucked not being capable enough to make our own pose. I am very happy with the end result, but man, please don't do that again to me. At first I thought this would be an incredibly easy transformation. I do have to say that I didn't necessarily struggle with the drawing itself, but the end result is definitely not what I had hoped for. I just thought it would look amazing whenever I added the screen onto his face, but the dark grey color just doesn't fit Scorbunny. Iron Hubs. This Pokemon can generate huge amounts of fire energy when running. Once it's fully charged, it can jump with so much strength, which makes him able to float for hours upon hours. We do believe that it has a way to use the energy to stay afloat, but we're not yet sure how they actually do it. They also seem to be kind and easy to befriend, so they aren't a threat, at least not yet. Like I said before, this is not my best piece, and I'm definitely not in love with it. I think that the effect gets ruined because of its white color. Like I've mentioned quite a few times before, this piece is my least favorite of them all. I know I would probably be able to fix it with the current amount of knowledge I have, but let's just use this knowledge on the evolution instead. We gave the first form the fire flying typing, and even though he doesn't really look like a flying type, I still think it works with the lore we wrote for him. This is what I want to do for Abud as well. The biggest change we had to make for this piece was to make sure we didn't fill his entire face with a dark color. We achieved this by adding in the screen, but still keeping the nose part separated. For the ears I did decide to make them float again, but I didn't want to just make them float like we did in the first form. I tried to make a base on its head, so it still kinda looks like it's attached, but it's actually not. I also got more feedback on my latest two videos, saying that my future forms still use too many round shapes in them. This makes them too organic, and it doesn't sound like a robot as much. This is why from now on, I'm trying to make some of their features a little bit more blocky or sharp. Not all of them though, because I do think you need to keep using round shapes, but we just have to find a good balance for it. Iron Kick. Just like its previous form, this Pokemon generates a lot of fire energy. It seems that they've also developed a way of flying, instead of only floating. It appears that they can use their generated power to push them forwards with their ears. This way of flying is very slow, and scientists first thought that they were still just floating. I think we've definitely upgraded Iron Hub's design. It is missing a rubbery patch on its design, but I just wasn't able to find a place where I could add it without it getting too cluttered. For this design I wanted to use a few features of his Gigantamax form. I decided to use the ears because I felt like the first two stages didn't capture the flying type enough. I think these ears definitely do give off that typing, and it finally doesn't rely on the lore too much anymore. We also made sure to bring back all the blocky metallic shapes we used on the second stage. I'm talking about making his fur look less organic, because that doesn't sound like a robot as much. We were also able to solve the issue of not being able to add in a rubber patch on the design, since we did have enough space to add it on its belly without it looking too cluttered. I really liked the moment when I put in the colors, since the added black almost made it look like he plays for a different team, as if he's wearing a different jersey. Iron Feet. This high-flying ace has incredible aerial mobility with the large boosters in his ear. It loves to show off and bullies other Pokemon by shooting fireballs from above. I know Iron Feet isn't the best name, but I couldn't use the word striker because we've already used it for Combusken. I just wasn't able to come up with a better name. I'm sorry guys. This drawing was mostly just me trying to tweak his facial features to make him look more mature and fearless. The biggest struggle I had for this one was that I tried to make everything fit. I think I've achieved that by placing one of his horns behind his head. This gave his left eye a bit more space and made the design a lot more clear. I also added a marking between his eyes, which looks very similar to the clones from the Mewtwo movie. Horned Fin. It is said that Horned Fin were aggressive hunters, using their horns to stab their prey with the force of a raging Tauros. However, more recent research denies this theory. They appear to be calm, and the only instances of them using their horns is for fighting other males for a mate. In the battles for mates, the loser is forced to leave the group. Despite being a fairly brave Pokemon, The horned fin that loses usually breaks into tears after the battle. I am pretty happy with this design. I think we've done a good job in switching his personality to make him look a lot less scared and whiny. I just thought that wouldn't really fit a Paradox Pokemon. This piece was a perfect example of how sometimes you have to change the features of a Pokemon once you evolve it. I didn't want to keep the huge horns on its face, and I also wanted to stay close to the colors regular Drizzle has. This resulted in a design which looks quite different from his first form, but I do still think it looks similar enough to feel like his evolution. I also wanted to change the typing of this line because we came up with some cool lore for this Pokemon, so the water normal typing didn't fit him anymore. Our idea was to make this Pokemon into an egg poaching thief, which fits the dark typing perfectly. Just like the first form, we did have to make sure that he wouldn't look scared or weak, since Paradox Pokemon are a lot stronger than their normal counterparts. We achieved this by making him look a bit like an emo kid, but still capturing some smugness into the design. The colors were just a bright variant of his normal colors, and we just added a dark blue accent color to the mix. Repton Poacher. This Pokemon steals eggs of various species. It particularly likes stealing from neighboring Repton poachers. If the Pokemon gets caught, there will be a big fight amongst each other, which usually ends in a Pokemon in critical condition. I really like the new direction we're going for this line, and it would be awesome to see what an evil Inteleon would look like. At first I wasn't really sure what to do with this piece, since it's kinda difficult to work with such a slender design. We got over that issue by just falling back onto the things we've learned so far. Just look at the previous stage and start adding those features back into this one as well. By doing this we managed to make his tail a lot thicker, and we added some spikes onto it too. We then brought back the jacket that we gave the second stage, and we also decided to make his cape a lot less streamlined. This really helped to make the design look less like a clothed Pokemon, which Inteleon sort of is. We also figured out that we had to address this issue even more, because I don't think a prehistoric form would have a clothed aesthetic. We fixed this problem by making sure we used a few less colors and by just deleting some details the regular form has. We also brought back the mask and gave his face a few more feral aspects to it. For the colors I wanted to move away from the regular color palette. I still want to keep the emo vibe to our design, and the normal colors are just too bright to do that. Creeping Thief. The sharp toes of this Pokemon allow it to grip onto any surface to put power behind its stab, effectively launching it forward every time. It can adjust its course with the fin on its head, and by grabbing onto obstacles with its tail, it can change direction in a heartbeat. This Pokemon seemingly deploys a hit and run tactic when encountering threats, making it very difficult to hit. The shiny for this piece deserved to fit our lore better than the regular shiny colors would. I decided to go for Dracula colors because I think that fits the dark typing quite well. This design took me quite a bit of fiddling to come up with something that looks nice. At the start I experimented with a big flower on his head, but that didn't look right to me. I eventually settled on a mane, and someone in my chat suggested to make it a grass electric type. I found this a very cool idea, and it gave me a new direction for this form. Electric types usually have a lot of sharply pointed features. I do feel like grass types are a bit more round shaped, so I want to combine these two. I think I've done a pretty good job on this sketch. For the colors I decided to go with a bit darker tint of green to make him look a bit more experienced. Thundering Fangs. This creature is said to be able to eat an entire school of fish Pokemon in one sitting. It uses its powerful electric fangs to stun the school and can then easily devour them. The fur of this Pokemon may look like it's rough, but it's actually very soft. Thundering Fangs is a very loyal Pokemon and will defend its trainer without hesitation. I think this Pokemon might come close to a perfect Paradox design. I'm not necessarily saying that this is the best drawing ever, because it could definitely improve on some points, but the concept is something I could really see in the games. This was one of the fan favorite designs out of the first batch, and I'm still very happy with it as well. It was actually very easy to transform Florigato into an evolution of my own creation. I just changed all of his features into the exact same features I gave Sprigatito. Take the eyebrows, lightning bolts, pointy leaves, and the mane for example. Someone in my chat told me that the regular form actually uses its pin as a yo-yo. This sparked another idea in my brain, no pun intended. We removed this pin and we gave him an electrical yo-yo, which finished this piece perfectly. It did take me quite a while to make, but that was mainly because he just had a lot of details. The colors didn't change much either. We used the regular colors and changed the accent color from pinkish to yellow, just like we did for the first stage. Masked Zipper. This Pokemon is very unpredictable and seems to lose interest in a heartbeat. It is also able to manipulate the static energy generated from its fur to create powerful shocks. Whenever it saved up enough energy, it can use this energy to create an orb of plasma. This orb is extremely dangerous and explodes on impact, yet it seems to like playing with the orb. I like this design a lot. We didn't use many electric type colors, but it still easily reads as an electric type. Sometimes a good shape language portrays your typing better than the colors ever would. I found a pose I wanted to use, but the picture was in a very low quality. This didn't make it impossible to work with, but I must say that it wasn't enjoyable either. We know he wanted to go for the dark electric typing, so our job was to tweak our features to fit this typing. The electric typing was easy, because we already established a lot of those details in our previous two designs. I'm talking about the sharp edges, the electric bolts on our face, and eventually the electric yo-yo. I did change it into a whip, but it can probably still function as a yo-yo. The dark typing wasn't necessarily difficult either, because the mask and the dark colors in general already helps a lot in that department. I did struggle a bit with the mane because of the mask, which was mainly due to my wrong approach for it. Jesus. I tried to place it in front of her head, but we didn't have enough room there, and I think it wouldn't have worked on an anatomy level either. The last thing we tried to get it to feel like the typing was to base the color palette on it. This did look awesome, but it wouldn't really fit the evolution line anymore, so we decided to use this palette for a shiny. Bolting Mage. This Pokemon uses its whip as a weapon to electrocute other Pokemon. It has a very high understanding of controlling electricity, which it teaches to their previous stages in order for them to evolve faster. Even though they can control electricity very well, they do still like to test their limits, resulting in a lot of damage around their habitats. In the end, this piece really came together, and I feel like it's a good final stage to finish up the line. Well, let me spoil this design for you. It's fantastic. I decided to make his feet into little jetpacks, and I made his arms float next to his body as well. I did try to give him a mohawk for a second, but I'm glad I just went with his normal hair. The color stayed pretty much similar to regular Fuecoco, but just with a bit more grey colors in there. I also tried to give the eyes the pixel texture, and I love it. Iron Chili. This Pokemon possesses unique jet units that allow him to fly through the sky at extreme speeds. Iron Chili seems to be very cheerful and kind-hearted. They don't usually engage in a fight with other Pokemon and spend their time playing with balls of energy created by their hands. I am extremely happy how this piece turned out, and I wouldn't really know what to improve on this one. This is another one of those designs I just hope will get into the game. But yeah, that is probably never going to happen. This was one of my favorite designs out of all of the first stage starters we made, so I had to do my best to make it look amazing. The one thing I definitely wanted in this design was the jet-like feet. Since this is a second stage, which are mostly a bit awkward, I thought it would be a good idea to make him a worse flyer than his predecessor. I did this by pointing both of the jets to the opposite side, in order to make him look a bit wobbly. For the arms I decided to use hinges again, instead of giving him floating hands. I do have to agree with you guys on that point, it instantly looks more robotic. For the colors I decided to keep the yellow parts the lighted areas, but I did still want to have the flame sombrero as well. It's just a very big part of his identity, and it just wouldn't look the same without it. You could say that I could have made it metallic, but I don't think we had to change it, since it's still a fire type. Iron Scorch. When this Pokemon evolves, the excess energy is formed into an egg shape and sits on top of Iron Scorch's head. This Pokemon lights its own head with thermal energy to keep the egg warm, and otherwise it might go out. If this happens, the Pokemon itself will turn off until it's exposed to a heat source again. This suggests that it uses the egg to power itself. It does appear to be insecure about his new gained weight, which also seems to affect his flying ability. Man, I'm actually very proud of myself. I've learned so much since the start of this challenge, and my designs are getting better and better. I can't wait to evolve the second stages, because those designs are gonna be sick. This was one of those very easy drawings. I knew exactly where I wanted to go with this concept, since the first 2 stages laid it out perfectly. My goal for Skellydirge was to make him into a well-experienced jet-fueled rocket blaster. We tried to achieve this by making him look balanced on his jets, unlike his second stage. The other changes were kinda easy, because Skellydirge already looks quite robot-like. We brought the segmented arms back and turned his hands into blasters. This already looked a lot like the wanted result, combined with the jets as legs. We then just simply had to make sure to add a lot of areas where we would be able to display the lights on. When we added in the colors, the piece really started to come together. We did decide to leave out the purple color on its nose, since I thought the design already looked quite busy. I think that if we kept the purple color in there, it would have only distracted us from the rest of the design. Oh yeah, we also made his bird like a little cute robot. Iron Inferno. The energy which was contained as an egg in a Pokemon's previous stage now powers up a small device that it uses for tracking purposes. The drone is easily able to keep up with Iron Inferno's speed and sends the scanned information through radio waves. Research shows that despite this Pokemon being very ferocious while battling, it is actually very caring to its drone and previous stages. I love this piece so much. I know some of you find it annoying that I keep complimenting myself, but you have to understand that I wasn't able to make these type of pieces a few months ago. I'm just so happy with the progress I've made, and guys, I'm really not trying to blow my own horn. At first I didn't expect to make a drawing that would have looked as good as this one turned out. I didn't have to tweak much about this design, and the sketching process was over before I knew it. We just gave him a body patch, detached its arms from its body, and added the screen onto his face. We didn't change much for the colors, but adding the grey parts onto him instantly sold him as a robot. Iron Quack, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon appears to be designed for sport and fashion. They can change the color of their head crests and flippers to convey their emotions. They're used for swimming competitions to see which Iron Quack can reach the goal the fastest and in the most beautiful way. Despite that, they're quite selfish and think highly of themselves. This makes them perform worse in some occasions. I wasn't really sure what his second typing should be, but I eventually set it on a water fairy type. I just felt like his head crest gives a bit of fairy type energy. I didn't want to just convert him into a robot, but I wanted to add something to the design as well. We weren't really sure which typing the first form should have, because I didn't really think about it while creating the design. This is why I added the ribbons to this design to portray a ribbon dancer. I thought this would be a fitting direction to go to, since the entire evolution line is supposed to be a bit elegant, and I think elegancy fits the fairy typing quite well. I did get to the point of having to decide if I wanted to continue detaching his wings, because we've learned that it isn't necessary for a good future design. For this piece I did actually decide to do it, because I loved the idea of the Pokemon dancing fluently without being limited by the capability of regular wings. We also added a few rubber patches and dark metallic features so it would look even more like an evolution. I made the color for the lighted area a bit lighter than its regular form as well, because I don't like to use dark colors for that feature, and I think it would be a good segue to the final form. Iron Grace. It is theorized that this Pokemon has been created for the sole purpose of entertainment. It uses its glowing ribbons to nearly hypnotize the crowd, with a combination of beautiful lights and soothing movements. It is a calm and very proud Pokemon, but in a rare occasion of being booed by an audience member, it loses its cool and will kick them with its powerful legs. I think this design looks awesome. I especially love the tiny detail of the added ribbons, and this feature will probably be the main focal point for his final evolution. We started off by detaching his arms, in order to keep the aesthetic of this line the same. In our second stage we gave him ribbons, and I definitely wanted to bring that back into this one as well. I didn't just want to use the boring ribbons we used earlier, so I thought it would be cool to use the ribbons Quaquaval has on his regular design. This instantly made the design a lot more interesting, and it was then just time to add in the basic robotic features. We're talking about the rubber patch, the screen on his face, and the segmented hands of course. The colors were a bit tricky to decide on, since his entire body was blue already, and it took me quite a while to figure out which parts needed to be the lighted areas. Iron Swing. This Pokemon is known to be one of the best dancers in the world. They are able to dance to any type of music, and they love to provide entertainment with their graceful movements. They use these movements in battle to gracefully evade and attack. I think this piece is really cool. I especially like the look of his shiny because it gives me an AI feeling. The goal for this form was to make him look a bit more wild. That's why we used the spiky-eared Pichu as a reference. I've always liked that form, so I thought it would be cool to bring it back. We then started out by extending his cheek pouches by giving them some fur. We also added small teeth to his mouth, and we made his toes look a bit more feral. After that we gave him some chest fur, where he put in 3 spikes to add a bit more color into the design, and we made his tail a lot hairier as well. I didn't want this piece to be asymmetrical, so we copied over the spikes from one ear to the other. The last thing we added was the makeup next to his eyes. I've spent a bit more time studying the real Paradox Pokemon, and I noticed that each and every one of them has this detail. It also really helped to portray his other typing, which is fire. Fluffy Sparks. This Pokemon appears to be unskilled in controlling his fire energy. Any kind of shock causes it to release this energy spontaneously. However, it is capable enough to control their electricity, unlike Pichu. I really think the makeup added just the amount of extra Paradox feeling our designs were lacking. I will definitely be using this on all the other past forms from now on. This was quite an easy transformation, since we now have a guide to follow. We began by bringing back the fur on the ears, but because of it being an evolution, I decided to make the fur a lot bigger. We then extended his cheeks again, and we gave him another set of chest fur, this time with 4 spikes instead of 3. My idea for the tail was to make it completely black, like we did for the first form, but you weren't able to see the difference between the ear anymore. You might be thinking that we could just fix that with shadows, but since the color of the fur is so dark, you weren't even able to see the shadows. This made me opt into the yellow color, with only the base of the tail being black. This solution wasn't even that bad, because the original design does the same thing, only with a brown color instead of the black one. Static Cheeks. When this Pokemon is angered, it immediately releases all the energy it has in its body. This results in a huge electrical fireball, which can be seen from kilometers away. They do tend to live in groups where they fight each other in order to survive, which makes these areas extremely dangerous. I am actually quite happy with this line so far. It's very basic, but all the small details together make up for a pretty interesting design. I'm especially in love with these eyes. They're gorgeous. This design was a bit different than the one for Pikachu. Raichu has a few elements who differ quite much from the first 2 stages, so we had to see how we could implement those features back into this piece as well. We started out by adding another set of fur on his cheeks, and we gave him cute little teeth. His ears had an interesting shape, so I wanted to make sure not to stray too far away from them. This is why we kept the same shape, but just added the fur on the top and the bottom. After those changes, we added some fur on his tail, and we made the tip a bit spikier as well. The last thing we had to do was bring back the fur coat, and of course the small flames next to his eyes. We did decide to change up the color palette a bit more in order to fit our wanted typing. Fiery Blitz. When this Pokemon gets fully charged, its fur stands straight up and it's ready to release a devastating blast of energy. It appears that this Pokemon gets extremely aggressive when he has too much energy flowing through its veins. Luckily it can release some of this energy through its tail. I am very proud of this line, and it really shows that we never stop improving with these pieces. They aren't my favorite designs that I've made yet, but they are the most realistic past Paradox forms we have made. I wanted to do something special for this guy. I wanted to keep the option open for the evolutions to either be a past or a future form. I could have done this by making 2 separate Eevees, but I thought it would be cooler to make an Eevee which is both. I decided to use the Gigantamax form of Eevee for this piece because I instantly saw potential in it. The first thing we did was add some teeth onto the design and some angry eyebrows as well. The next thing we did was add all the robotic features to the bottom half of the Pokemon. I did struggle a bit on deciding what to do with the tail, but we eventually settled on a simple design where we segmented it through the middle. The last changes we made were some spikier ears and more fluffy eyebrows. It was then time to put in the colors, which were pretty easy to decide on. We did play around with the idea of the lighted area being in a rainbow color, but I decided that would be too overly designed, so we settled on a plain orange color. Chrono Hybrid. It is unknown how this Pokemon came into existence. Some say it was born from an Eevee, exposed to the unique radiation of the other Paradox Pokemon. This para-hybrid Pokemon is extremely friendly towards any trainer it encounters. It doesn't appear to evolve by just the evolution stones like Eevee, but it seems like it needs a combination of items in order to evolve. We've been doing a lot of tests to see which combinations are working, so let me go over the requirements in the next section. One of my viewers had the cool idea that this Pokemon would not just evolve by regular stones, but with an extra item, and I think that would be perfect for the games. Shout out to Gemini, by the way. I do want to mention that the shiny for this piece was quite funny, since you can't see the difference between the halves. We know that future forms always have grayed out shinies, but let that just be the color of regular shiny Eevee as well. At this point we had laid out a few design conventions that had to come back for these evolutions. All the past forms would need to have eyebrows and makeup under the eyes. I also added nails to those conventions because I thought it would help them stand out more. We decided to give this one long and elegant eyebrows because I thought it would be a great fit for it. This was also the piece where we decided that we wanted to give all the unused typings to these Pokemon. This will be a grass bug type, because there isn't a bug evolution. I didn't want to use typings twice, so if we used one, it was out of the typing pool. Since this Pokemon is supposed to be a bug type, I did have to add a few of those features into the design. My take on that would be the antennae with the light orbs at the ends of it. I placed them on the top and bottom of the face to make it look extra alien-like, which helps a lot since some bugs do kinda look like aliens. We also added an armor-like belly patch in order to give an exoskeleton look. The colors I used were slightly darker and saturated because I felt like that would fit the bug typing. Luminous Fill. This Pokemon seems to prefer night over daytime. The orbs at the ends of the antennae illuminate in the dark in order to lure in potential prey. It leeches off of them when captured and it prefers to keep its prey alive and lets it go after feeding off of it. This meal does leave an invisible mark on the prey, so it can easily be recaptured when Luminous Fill is hungry again. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Leaf Stone on Chrono Hybrid whilst holding on to Silver Powder. I am extremely happy how this piece turned out, because I feel like you can see both of the typings very clearly in the design. I quickly want to go over the design conventions for the future forms as well. Those are a bit easier to follow, because they only need the segmented legs and fingers, the rubber patch on their bellies, 2 lighted stripes on their legs, and if they have a tail, it needs to be segmented with connectors in between of the segments. That is basically what we did for this piece, and it resulted in a very cool looking Pokemon. Iron Sickle. This Pokemon tends to hang out around poisonous swamps, taking sample of the poisonous contents and experimenting on its effects on plants. It uses its needle-like headpieces to inject said samples into its targets. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using an Ice Stone and Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a poison barb. When I was making these shiny, I noticed literally nothing changed. In order to make a shiny that would be loved, instead of a terrible one like some real Pokemon have, I decided to use a dark metallic color instead of the light ones they usually have. We decided on the dark ghost typing for this one, so we had to figure out a way to make that work. We started out with the basic additions of adding more fur onto the ears, tails and eyebrows. I did play around with moon crescents as eyebrows, but that just looks stupid, so we didn't use that. The biggest other change we made was to make his front legs translucent, as if this Pokemon is floating between the spirit realm and the physical world. We then just added in the claws, added even more fur onto his body, and we changed his rings into spiky ones. Even though a pinkish color for the front legs would have looked a lot more ghost-like, we had to stick to the original color palette. Darkened Fate. This Pokemon likes to hunt unsuspecting trainers under the covers of the night whenever possible. While that can be seen as rude, they just want attention because they're seen as a bad omen. Most people are thought to stay clear of it. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Moonstone on Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a spell tag. I think Umbreon is one of the cooler evolutions, and I do think this form looks just as cool, if not maybe a little bit cooler. This would be a Psychic Rock type, which is quite difficult to add into a future form. I thought about a lot of concepts, but adding literal rocks into the design would be something for a past form, not a future one. Someone then suggested that we could just use crystals instead, since some rock Pokemon use this feature as well. We added them on the legs and we made a few extra ones on her forehead. I must say that this piece looks way too flat, so if you have any ideas how to make it look better, let me know. Iron Kinesis. This Pokemon focuses its psychic powers through the gemstones on its forehead and legs. It can pick up rocks and large boulders to clear out paths for both it and its trainer. It has a rivalry with Darkened Fate, as their ghostly scares distract this Pokemon concentration, causing its psychic powers to falter. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Sunstone on Chrono Hybrid whilst also holding onto a Heartstone. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of this piece. It's the only bad one of all my evolutions, so the next pieces will make up for it. We started out by bringing back the eyebrows in a water drop shape, and we also gave it the makeup under the eyes. We then tried to extend the spikes on its back to fit the dragon typing more, but I didn't like how it looked, so I removed it. After that, we added in the claws, and we also gave him a rough belly patch. I disliked the fin around the neck of regular Vaporeon, so I wanted to change it up for my piece. I took big reference from our Eevee form, and we used the same neck fur we used on that piece. This gave me a new vision for this design. We made the fins on his head look a bit more spiky, and then added the same fur on his fins at the end of his tail. We also gave him a scaly back piece, and we added some scales to the design in general. For the colors we used a slightly more vibrant variant, and we played around with the yellow eyes for a bit. I asked my community if they wanted me to give all the past forms yellow eyes, just like the real designs have, but they voted for unique eyes for every drawing, so we changed it up a bit. Raging Rapids. This Pokemon is a semi-aquatic carnivore that nests in low temperature, dark, underwater or land caves. Depending on the available food, they will decide whether they will nest on the water or on land. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Water Stone on Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a Dragon Fang. I prefer this design so much over the original Vaporeon. I just love the balance between looking cute and menacing. And yeah, the shiny looks fire as well. This will be an electric fighting type. I had a few ideas to make that secondary typing work, but I knew it would be a challenge. My first changes were some power bracelets on his legs, as if he's holding himself back during training. I then got the idea to add a jaw like the one from Iron Thorns. I did this because I didn't want to make the same mistake we did for Espeon, not changing enough. It would also help a bit for the fighting type, because we could just say it uses it a lot when fighting. We also added back in the lights on his legs, and we played around with the tail, since that was what we used on the other forms. The tail looked very weird though, so we decided to eventually remove it. I did feel like the design wouldn't have enough lighted parts without it, so we brought in some solar panels under his chin. These look a little bit like fighting gloves from far away, which helps for the typing. The last change we made was making all the fur blocky. People did tell me it looked a bit like Five Nights at Freddy puppets, so I decided to use a form of shading where it would look even more menacing. Iron Jawlock. This Pokemon has built-in solar panels which convert sunlight into a lot of energy. This makes him able to stay awake for days on end. It also has a built-in vent in his mouth that keeps it from overheating. This Pokemon loves to hang around in abandoned restaurants where it scares off anyone who enters. The only way to get this Pokemon is using a Thunderstone and Chrono Hybrid whilst holding on to a black belt. This was a very fun drawing to make, since we had to combine the fire and ground typings. The first thing we did were the eyebrows, of course, and we brought back the claws. We then had the idea to give him a clay neck color instead of the fur he usually has there. I did this because we wouldn't have enough ground type features otherwise, and I was going to make almost all of the fur into flames, which would have looked weird on his body there. We did make some flames come out of the collar for the concept that it does have flames under it. We then added the makeup onto his face and we made sure to make it look blocky for another ground type reference. Since we were going to make most of the fur into flames, but not for the eyebrows, I thought it would have looked weird that only the eyebrows had fur. That's why I added it onto the tip of the ears, and it worked out perfectly. The colors were the same for the body, and the rest was based off of ground type colors. I was a bit scared to render out the flames, but luckily I had enough practice on our Charizard form, so it was actually pretty easy. Volcanic Clay. This Pokemon lives near volcanoes, where it collects firestones to add onto its color. These firestones are necessary because they are highly heat resistant and are capable to keep most of the explosive firepower of this Pokemon contained. The only way to get this Pokemon is by using a Firestone and Chrono hybrid whilst holding on to Soft Sand. This piece looks absolutely fire. Literally. I am very happy with how it turned out. And that shiny looks so cool. This would be a fairy flying type, but I didn't want to go too hard into the flying aesthetic. My path for this piece was more to keep it looking very similar as the regular form, but with the right amount of lore, it would be capable of flight. I wanted to make sure that this piece wouldn't look like Espeon, because you know, Tony Stark always learns from his mistakes, and I do too. This is why I added a lot of those robotic features, and instead of giving him an entire mask of blackness, I just made the eyes emulate a hole where the screens would be. The other big changes were basically just some repeated steps of segmenting all the ribbons, which would be the way for this Pokemon to fly. I think this has to be my favorite future form. Okay, maybe after Swampert. Iron Pixie. This Pokemon is as adorable as they say, but it's also a skilled acrobatic flyer. They are able to use their ribbon-like extensions as wings and can reach very high speeds while doing so. The only way to get this Pokemon is forming a perfect bond with Chrono Hybrid whilst holding onto a sharp beak. Let's go! This was the final starter we had to make, and it's a banger as well. Wow, this was a project and a half. Like I said before, I'm currently working on all the legendaries and eventually will do the mythicals and pseudo legendaries as well. Drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and good